On my daughter's wedding day, I covered the costs, picked out the best vineyard, and even arranged the catering. But when I looked at the head table, the seat next to her was reserved for my ex-husband and his new girlfriend. Even their cat had a spot. She turned to me and said, "Mom, you were always better at staying out of the spotlight." I didn't say a word. Right before I left, I slipped a note on the table. When she read it, the whole room froze. My hand froze midair as I stared at the cream-colored envelope. There, in familiar handwriting I hadn't seen in decades, was my name, Eleanor Richardson. Not Mom. Just Eleanor. The wedding invitation felt heavier than paper should, weighted with 30 years of silence and pain. My daughter Emma, my only child, was getting married, and somehow I'd made the guest list. Though barely. I sank into my kitchen chair, coffee forgotten, as my fingers traced the elegant script announcing the union of Emma Richardson and James Brennan. The venue was Willow Creek Vineyard, the date just 8 weeks away. No personal note accompanied it. No explanation for breaking 30 years of complete estrangement. Just a formal invitation, as if I were a distant acquaintance she felt obligated to include. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 months earlier, I'd sat in Dr. Mitchell's office as he delivered news that changed everything. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer with a prognosis of 6 months, maybe less. "We can try aggressive treatment," he'd said, but his eyes told me what his words couldn't. I'd made peace with dying alone, arranging my affairs and preparing for a quiet end. Then Emma's invitation appeared, like a cruelly timed miracle. Or perhaps a final chance. Richard, my ex-husband, had methodically erased me from our daughter's life after our divorce. When Emma was 16, he convinced her I'd abandoned them both, that I didn't want the burden of motherhood. The truth, that Richard had cheated repeatedly, that he'd wanted me to terminate my pregnancy with Emma, that our divorce came after I discovered his affair with his secretary, never reached her ears. He had money, influence, and a charming smile that concealed his lies. I had nothing but my word against his, and somehow that was never enough. I stared at my reflection in the hallway mirror, wondering if Emma would even recognize me now. My once auburn hair had faded to a soft gray, and lines mapped my face like roads on a well-traveled map. Cancer had already begun its quiet work, leaving me thinner, my skin slightly yellowed. I picked up the phone and dialed the RSVP number, half expecting to reach a wedding planner. Instead, Emma answered. "Hello." Her voice, mature now but still unmistakably hers, sent a shock through my system. "Emma? It's your mother." The word felt foreign on my tongue after so long. The silence stretched between us, a gulf 30 years wide. "I see you got the invitation," she finally said, her tone carefully neutral. I gripped the phone tighter. "Yes. I'd love to come." Another pause. "Good. Actually, I was hoping to meet with you. There are some details about the wedding we should discuss." The coffee shop where we agreed to meet was neutral territory, filled with college students and young professionals. I arrived 20 minutes early, claiming a corner table with 2 comfortable chairs. My heart pounded as I watched the door, scanning each face that entered. When she finally appeared, I almost didn't recognize her. At 46, Emma had Richard's height and my eyes, her dark hair cut in a stylish bob. She moved with confidence I'd never possessed. "Eleanor," she said with a nod, sitting across from me. Not Mom or even Mother. "Eleanor." I swallowed the hurt. "Emma. You look beautiful." She avoided my eyes, focusing instead on ordering a latte she would barely touch. Small talk felt impossible, so we sat in uncomfortable silence until she finally spoke. "I heard you've done well for yourself." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "Yes. I built my interior design business from nothing. It's been fulfilling." I didn't mention the lonely holidays, the birthdays marked only by unanswered cards, the emptiness of success with no one to share it with. Emma nodded, tapping manicured nails against her cup. "Dad's having some financial troubles. The wedding costs are more than we expected." She finally met my gaze and I understood the invitation's purpose. Not reconciliation. Money. The pain was sharp but familiar. I'd built my life around such disappointments. I'd be happy to help, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. Whatever you need. Relief flashed across her face, quickly masked. I was thinking you could help with the venue. And maybe the catering. I'll cover everything, I heard myself say. The venue, catering, flowers, your dress, all of it. Her eyes widened. Everything? But that would be tens of thousands of dollars. I smiled, not mentioning the life insurance policy that would now go unused, the savings meant for retirement I wouldn't reach. Consider it 30 years of missed birthday and Christmas presents. Emma's expression softened slightly, the first crack in her armor. She pulled out a folder with venue options and for an hour, we discussed wedding details as if we were merely business associates. She never asked about my life or health. I didn't tell her. What good would it do to share my diagnosis? To explain that this wedding would likely be the last significant event of my life? That helping her was my final chance at some form of connection? As we parted outside the coffee shop, an awkward moment hung between us. Should we hug? Shake hands? In the end, she gave a quick nod. I'll email you the vendor contacts. Emma, I called as she turned to leave. She paused. I'm glad you reached out. Whatever the reason. Something flickered across her face. Doubt, perhaps, or a question unasked. But she simply nodded again and walked away. That night, I sat alone in my garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors too beautiful for such an ordinary Tuesday. I had 2 months to plan a perfect wedding for the daughter who barely acknowledged me. 2 months, if I was lucky, to find some way to bridge the chasm between us. 2 months to decide whether to tell her the truth about her father, about my illness, about the years I'd spent trying to reach her. The irony wasn't lost on me. After 30 years of silence, I'd finally been invited back into my daughter's life, just as mine was ending. The weeks following our coffee shop meeting unfolded in a blur of wedding preparations and doctor's appointments. I scheduled chemotherapy sessions for early mornings so I could make afternoon calls to vendors without the telltale exhaustion in my voice. The treatment wouldn't save me, but it might buy me enough time to see Emma walk down the aisle. That became my singular focus, to hold on just long enough for that moment. Emma communicated almost exclusively through email, sending clinical lists of her preferences with occasional texts when immediate decisions were needed. When I suggested we visit venues together, her response was quick. No need. James and I will check them out. Just handle the contracts. So I became a silent architect of her perfect day, working behind the scenes with only a signature on checks as evidence of my involvement. I created a separate email address, Emma's Wedding Coordinator, and used it to communicate with vendors who never knew I was the mother of the bride. 3 vineyard options met Emma's requirements, but Willow Creek Vineyard captured my heart immediately. Nestled in the rolling hills outside of town, its magnificent oak trees and sweeping views reminded me of a picnic spot Richard, Emma, and I had visited when she was just 7. She'd worn a yellow sundress that day and collected acorns in the pockets until they bulged. When I suggested the vineyard to Emma, I didn't mention this memory, only sending photos highlighting the elegant reception hall and ceremony space beneath centuries-old trees. This one, she replied simply. I signed the contracts the next day, working with the venue coordinator Lisa, who assumed I was a professional planner hired by the family. You must be close with the bride to put such care into every detail, Lisa commented as we walked the grounds finalizing the layout. I smiled, swallowing the truth. I've known her all her life. I selected caterers who could accommodate Emma's preference for seasonal, locally sourced ingredients. I remembered how, as a child, she'd refused to eat strawberries out of season, insisting they tasted like water, not berries. This memory guided my meetings with Chef Anton, who crafted a menu celebrating spring's bounty without knowing its emotional significance to me. The mother of the bride usually attends these tastings, he remarked as I sampled potential dishes alone, taking careful notes on each. She's very busy, I replied, the half-truth bitter on my tongue. The florist asked about mother-daughter corsages, and I redirected the conversation to centerpieces. The invitation designer inquired about my name for the formal announcement, and I simply pointed to Emma's typewritten instructions. Mr. Richard Richardson requests the honor of your presence. My name appeared nowhere in the invitation I was paying for. Each exclusion was a paper cut, minor alone but agonizing in accumulation. Yet I continued, selecting linens in Emma's favorite shade of blue, arranging for a string quartet to play the classical pieces she'd loved as a teenage violinist, ordering the specific champagne I'd noticed her drinking in the single photo of her on social media I could access. One afternoon, Emma surprised me with a phone call. My heart leapt at the unexpected connection. The bridesmaids are worried about their hair and makeup, she said, no greeting. Can you arrange someone to come to the venue? They don't want to travel around that morning. Of course, I replied, scribbling notes. How many in the bridal party? 5 bridesmaids, me, James's mother. She paused. And Dad's girlfriend, Melissa. The pencil stilled in my hand. I see. Not me. The silence stretched uncomfortably before Emma finally spoke. I didn't think you'd want to be involved in that part. Another exclusion, another pain swallowed. Whatever you prefer, Emma. I'll arrange it. After we hung up, I called my oncologist and moved my next treatment, explaining that the wedding preparations required my full attention. What I didn't say was that the emotional toll was becoming as debilitating as the cancer itself. The rehearsal dinner arrived, held at an upscale restaurant Richard had selected. I'd paid for it, of course, but sat at a table far from the wedding party, watching as Richard stood to give a toast. As father of the bride and the man behind this beautiful wedding, he began, raising his glass, I couldn't be prouder of the arrangements we've made for my little girl's special day. The familiar anger rose in me, but I tamped it down. This wasn't about me or Richard. It was about Emma having a perfect day regardless of who received credit. After dinner, I approached Emma as she chatted with her future in-laws, hoping for a moment of connection before tomorrow's whirlwind. Everything's set for tomorrow, I said softly. The flowers will arrive at 9, the photographer at 10. Great, Emma replied, not quite meeting my eyes. James, this is Eleanor. She's been helping with the wedding planning. Not my mother. Just Eleanor the helper. James shook my hand warmly. Everything looks amazing. We really appreciate all your work. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat, and excused myself shortly after. Back in my hotel room, I sat at the desk and pulled out the stationery I'd brought. My hands trembled, partly from the disease consuming me and partly from the weight of what I was about to write. For 30 years I'd protected Emma from the ugly truth about her father, about our marriage, about the events that led to our divorce. I'd shouldered Richard's lies without fighting back, believing that someday Emma would seek the truth herself. That day never came. And now time was running out. I uncapped my pen and began to write, pouring 3 decades of silenced truths onto the page. The words flowed like a long-dammed river finally breaking free, messy, powerful, unstoppable. I wrote about Richard's infidelities, about his demand that I abort the pregnancy, about his threats when I refused. I explained how, after our divorce, he'd used his money and influence to cut me from her life, returning my letters and blocking my calls. Finally, I added the truth I'd been hiding since our coffee shop meeting. My diagnosis, my prognosis, the reason I'd agreed to fund the wedding without conditions. I sealed the envelope, not yet certain if I would actually deliver it. Tomorrow would decide. Tomorrow, at my daughter's wedding, I would either maintain 30 years of silence or finally speak my truth. I woke before my alarm, the letter sitting on the nightstand where I'd left it. Sleep had been elusive, filled with dreams of Emma as a child, reaching for me across an ever-widening chasm. Morning light filtered through the hotel curtains as I prepared for my daughter's wedding day. I took extra care with my appearance, applying makeup to disguise the pallor that chemotherapy had left behind. The navy blue dress I'd chosen was elegant but understated, something that wouldn't draw attention but would still honor the occasion's importance. The sealed letter went into my clutch purse. I still hadn't decided whether to deliver it. When I arrived at Willow Creek Vineyard at 8, the grounds were already buzzing with activity. Florists arranged cascades of spring blooms across the ceremony arch, caterers prepared the reception hall, and the string quartet tested acoustics near the ancient oak where Emma would say her vows. Everything was unfolding exactly as I'd planned, a symphony I'd composed but wouldn't conduct. "Mrs. Richardson?" The venue coordinator approached with a clipboard. "The mother of the bride corsage just arrived. Would you like to see it?" "I'm not," I began, then stopped myself. "Yes, I'd like to see it." The delicate arrangement of white roses and blue forget-me-nots was perfect. I'd selected it myself after all, though I'd never expected to wear it. "It's lovely," I said, handing it back. "Emma's bridal party should be arriving soon. They'll need the private suite unlocked." I busied myself with last-minute details, straightening table numbers, adjusting floral arrangements, ensuring the cake had arrived intact. Anything to avoid thinking about the growing activity in the bridal suite where my daughter prepared for her wedding without me. At one point I passed an open door and glimpsed Emma in her gown, surrounded by her bridesmaids. She was breathtaking, radiant in ivory lace, her dark hair swept up with pearl pins. I froze, unable to move, drinking in the sight of my daughter as a bride. One of the bridesmaids noticed me and quietly closed the door. The ceremony was set to begin at 2. At 1:30, a young usher approached me as I made final adjustments to the guest book table. "Are you with the bride or groom?" he asked, offering his arm. The question struck me like a physical blow. "Neither, apparently." "Both." "How to explain?" "The bride," I said simply. "I'm her mother." His eyes widened slightly. "Oh. I'm sorry, Mrs. Richardson. I didn't realize." "It's fine," I assured him. "Where should I sit?" He led me not to the front row where parents traditionally sat, but to a seat near the back on the aisle. "The bride's father requested this arrangement," he explained uncomfortably. Of course he did. I thanked the young man and sat alone, watching as the seats around me filled with guests I didn't know. I recognized Richard's sister in the front row, along with cousins I hadn't seen in decades. Not one person approached me or seemed to recognize who I was. The music began and the wedding party processed down the aisle. Richard appeared with Emma on his arm, both beaming. My breath caught at their resemblance. The same confident stride, the same charming smile. He gave her away with a dramatic kiss on the cheek, then took his place in the front row. Throughout the ceremony, I remained a spectator, watching my only child marry from a distance that felt both physical and metaphorical. I didn't cry until they exchanged vows, James promising to stand by Emma through all of life's challenges. I wondered who would stand by her when I was gone, if she would ever know how much I had loved her, how hard I had tried to remain in her life. After the ceremony, guests moved toward the reception hall. I lingered, allowing the crowd to disperse before following. The hall looked magical, exactly as I'd envisioned, with twinkling lights, lush greenery, and tables adorned with blue hydrangeas and silver accents. A small touch I'd added were framed quotes about love at each table, quotes from books Emma had loved as a child. The seating chart near the entrance confirmed what I already suspected. There was no place for me at the family table. I found my name at table 12 in the far corner of the room, seated with distant connections of the groom. I made my way there, nodding politely to my tablemates, who introduced themselves without any recognition of my relationship to the bride. From my position I had a clear view of the head table on the raised platform. Richard sat beside Emma with James on her other side. Next to Richard was Melissa, his girlfriend of 5 years. a woman younger than Emma with platinum blonde hair and a dress that matched Richard's tie perfectly. Most jarring was the small decorated stool beside Melissa's chair, where an orange tabby cat in a bow tie sat contentedly eating from a crystal dish. The cat had a place at my daughter's wedding head table. I did not. I excused myself from table 12 and approached the restroom, needing a moment alone. The pain was becoming physical, a tightness in my chest that had nothing to do with my illness. In the hallway, I nearly collided with Emma as she emerged from the bridal suite. "Oh," she said, startled. "Eleanor, is everything okay with the reception?" "Everything's perfect," I assured her, forcing a smile. "You look beautiful, Emma. Truly radiant." She nodded, smoothing her dress. "Thank you. And thank you for all of this. It's exactly what I wanted." "I noticed Whiskers made the head table," I said, attempting lightness in my tone. "He looks very distinguished in his bow tie." Emma's expression shifted, a flicker of discomfort crossing her features. "Melissa insisted. She treats him like her child." She glanced toward the reception. "I should get back." "Of course," I said, then added, "I was surprised not to be seated with family. I thought perhaps—" "Mom," she interrupted, the first time she'd called me that in 30 years. It should have been a moment of connection, but her tone was impatient. "You were always better at staying out of the spotlight. This arrangement works better for everyone." The words hit me like a slap. Better at staying out of the spotlight? As if my 3 decades of absence had been my choice rather than my punishment. As if I'd willingly stepped away from motherhood rather than having it ripped from me. "I see," I managed, my voice barely audible. Emma was already turning away, hurrying back to her reception, to her father who had stolen her from me, to the girlfriend who had insisted her cat sit where I should have been. I stood alone in the hallway, clutching my purse where the letter waited. In that moment my decision crystallized. The weight of 30 years of silence, of swallowed truths and buried pain, became too heavy to bear another second. I would no longer protect Richard at the cost of my relationship with my daughter. I would no longer die with these secrets intact. I removed the letter from my purse and walked with new purpose toward the reception hall, toward the head table, toward the last chance for truth I would ever have. The weight of the envelope felt heavier with each step I took toward the head table. The orchestra was playing a waltz, couples swirling on the dance floor, champagne flowing freely. No one noticed me, the invisible woman in navy blue, clutching 3 decades of unspoken truths. As I approached, I saw Richard lean over to whisper something in Emma's ear that made her laugh. The same conspiratorial gesture I'd witnessed countless times during our marriage, usually at someone else's expense. The familiarity of it stopped me in my tracks. What was I doing? Was I about to ruin my daughter's wedding day with revelations that would shatter her image of her father? Would exposing Richard's lies heal anything, or would it only cause Emma more pain? She was happy in this moment, radiant, loved, celebrating the beginning of her new life. I retreated, finding a quiet corner near the gift table. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and reread what I'd written. The words seemed harsh in the glow of wedding lights, too raw for such a joyful occasion. Yet the truth remained the truth, and my time to share it was running out. I noticed the wedding coordinator approaching the head table with the cake-cutting schedule. This was my opportunity. I intercepted her, summoning the authoritative tone I'd developed over decades of running my business. "Lisa, I need to leave something at the bride's place setting. It's important that she sees it before the speeches." Lisa nodded, professional and unquestioning. "Of course, Mrs. Richardson. Shall I tell her it's from you?" "She'll know," I said simply, handing her the envelope. I watched from a distance as Lisa placed the letter beside Emma's plate, discreetly adjusting it so it wouldn't be overlooked. Then I gathered my belongings and made my way toward the kitchen exit, where the catering staff busily prepared dessert plates. Chef Anton noticed me leaving. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Richardson? The cake cutting hasn't happened yet." "Everything is perfect," I assured him. The food was exceptional. You've outdone yourself. But you're the mother of the bride, he protested. Surely you want to stay for the speeches and dancing? I smiled sadly. Sometimes the greatest gift a mother can give is knowing when to step away. The evening air outside was cool and fragrant with jasmine. I paused on the stone path, looking back at the golden light spilling from the reception hall windows. Through the glass, I could see the celebration continuing without me, my daughter's perfect day orchestrated down to the last detail by my invisible hand. I had nearly reached my car when I heard it, the sudden collective hush that fell over the reception. Even the music stopped. I turned to see silhouettes frozen in the windows, all attention directed toward the head table. She had read the letter. My legs refused to carry me further. I sank onto a stone bench beneath one of the vineyard's ancient oaks, waiting. For what, I wasn't certain. Perhaps for the sound of sirens if Richard had a medical emergency from the shock. Perhaps for the angry mob of guests to chase me from the premises. Or perhaps just for the courage to drive away and let the chips fall where they may. What I hadn't expected was Emma's voice, amplified through the sound system, reading my words aloud for all to hear. My dearest Emma, her voice rang clear across the vineyard. By the time you read this, I will have left your celebration, not wishing to cause a scene on your special day. But there are truths you deserve to know, truths I've kept hidden to protect you. I closed my eyes, picturing the reception hall, every guest frozen with wineglass midair or fork suspended above plate. I have stage 4 pancreatic cancer, Emma continued, her voice breaking slightly. The doctors give me less than 3 months. When your invitation arrived, it felt like a miracle. A chance to see you one last time, to create one final memory with my daughter before I go. Through the open windows came the sounds of gasps and murmurs. I imagined Richard's face, reddening with anger or paling with shock, perhaps both. What your father never told you, Emma's voice grew stronger, edged with emotion, was that when I discovered I was pregnant with you, he demanded I end the pregnancy. He said a child would ruin his career plans, limit our freedom. When I refused, he began the first of many affairs. After you were born, he rarely participated in your care, resenting the attention you required. When I finally confronted him about his infidelity when you were 16, he turned everything against me. He used his money and influence to systematically erase me from your life, returning my letters unopened, blocking my phone calls, and telling you I had abandoned you both. The silence that followed was profound. Then came the sound of a chair scraping across hardwood. Dad. Emma's voice now, not reading but questioning. Is this true? Did you want Mom to abort me? I couldn't hear Richard's response, but Emma's next words were crystal clear. Look at me. You've always said Mom abandoned us. You said she chose her career over family. You said she didn't fight for custody because she didn't want the responsibility. Her voice rose with each accusation. Was it all lies? The murmuring grew louder. I heard a man's voice, Richard's, though his words were indistinct. The cat has a place at this table, Emma said, her voice breaking. Mom funded this entire wedding, picked everything, arranged everything, and you couldn't even seat her with family? Another pause, then the distinctive sound of a champagne glass shattering. Don't touch me, Emma's voice cracked like a whip. I want the truth. No. In front of everyone. I sat frozen on my bench, heart pounding. The confrontation I'd imagined for 30 years was happening just yards away, and I couldn't bring myself to witness it directly. Part of me wanted to run back in, to stand beside Emma, to face Richard together. But this moment belonged to her, her reckoning with the father who had shaped her understanding of the world with carefully constructed lies. Everyone out, Emma's voice commanded through the speakers. Reception's over. Please leave. Now. The vineyard doors burst open, guests spilling out in confused clusters, some glancing my way with new recognition in their eyes. Richard's voice carried across the lawn, pleading Emma's name. Melissa hurried past, clutching the cat carrier, mascara streaking her cheeks. I remained on my bench, invisible no longer, as the beautiful wedding I'd created imploded in spectacular fashion. The truth I'd kept buried for 30 years had finally emerged, shattering the perfect facade Richard had maintained for so long. I wasn't sure if I'd done the right thing. I only knew I couldn't die with those secrets still locked inside me, couldn't leave Emma believing the narrative Richard had crafted at my expense. Whatever happened next, at least it would be built on truth, not comfortable lies. The exodus of wedding guests continued for nearly 20 minutes. I remained on my bench, watching taillights disappear down the winding vineyard road. The string quartet packed their instruments in hushed silence. Caterers emerged from the kitchen door with confused expressions, carrying trays of uneaten desserts. The perfect wedding I'd orchestrated had unraveled in minutes, leaving stunned silence in its wake. I should leave too, I thought. My presence would only complicate an already devastating situation. I stood up, legs unsteady, and fumbled for my car keys. Mom. I froze at the sound of that single word. Emma stood at the edge of the garden path, still in her wedding gown, though she'd discarded her veil. Her makeup was smeared from tears, her carefully styled hair coming loose. She looked simultaneously like the teenager I'd lost and the woman I'd never had the chance to know. Emma, I whispered, unsure what to say next. I'm sorry about your wedding. She took a tentative step toward me. Is it true? About the cancer? I nodded, unable to soften this particular blow. Stage 4 pancreatic. It's aggressive. How long? 3 months, maybe less. The chemotherapy isn't working. Another step closer. And the rest? About Dad wanting me. She couldn't finish the sentence. Also true, I said quietly. I never wanted you to know that part. What child wants to hear they weren't wanted by a parent? But I couldn't leave you believing his version of our history. Not when you're dying, she finished for me. The vineyard fell silent except for the chirping of crickets and the distant sound of a car door slamming. The wedding photographer leaving, perhaps, or the last of the guests. Why did you leave? Emma asked suddenly, her voice small. Dad always said you chose your career over us. That you didn't fight for custody because you didn't want the responsibility. I sank back onto the bench, motioning for her to join me. After a moment's hesitation, she did, arranging her wedding dress carefully around her. I never left you, Emma. I fought for you with everything I had. I took a deep breath, steadying myself for revelations long overdue. Your father had powerful connections, judges, lawyers. He drained our joint accounts before I even knew he was planning to leave. Then he claimed I was unstable, unfit. He had witnesses, friends of his, who testified they'd seen me behaving erratically. Emma stared at me, eyes wide with disbelief. But that's not true. You were always the stable one. Dad was the one with the temper. I know, I said softly. But money and influence speak louder than truth in many courtrooms. I was granted supervised visitation at first, but even that stopped when your father moved you across state lines without notice. I hired 3 different private investigators to find you. By the time I did, he'd convinced you I'd abandoned you both. The letters, Emma said suddenly. When I was 17, I found a box of unopened letters in Dad's office. He told me they were from a disturbed woman who was obsessed with him, that he kept them as evidence in case he needed a restraining order. Those were my letters to you, I confirmed. I wrote every week for years. Birthday cards, Christmas presents, graduation gifts, all returned or apparently hidden from you. Emma covered her face with her hands. I've hated you for 30 years for something you didn't do. I reached out hesitantly and touched her shoulder. You were a child, Emma. He was your father, the parent who was present. Of course you believed him. I should have questioned things. Should have tried to find you when I got older, hear your side. He made that nearly impossible, I reminded her. He changed your last name after the divorce, moved repeatedly. I tried to find you through friends, family, even hired professionals. He was always one step ahead. Until my wedding, Emma said, looking up. Why did you agree to pay for everything after how I treated you at that coffee shop? I was cold, clinical. I practically asked for your money outright. Because you're my daughter, I said simply. And I'd rather have you in my life on any terms than not at all. Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing years of revelations in minutes. He left the reception, she finally said. When I confronted him about the abortion, about turning me against you, he couldn't even look at me. He grabbed Melissa and just left. His own daughter's wedding. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it. Whatever Richard had done, he was still her father. Don't be. Emma straightened her shoulders. It's not your apology to make. A cool breeze swept through the vineyard, causing Emma to shiver in her sleeveless gown. I instinctively removed my wrap and placed it around her shoulders, a maternal gesture 3 decades overdue. What happens now? She asked, clutching the fabric around her. That depends on what you want, I replied carefully. I've said my piece. I won't force my way into your life. Emma turned to me, really looking at me for the first time. I don't know where to start. 30 years of believing one version of the truth, and now. She shook her head. Can you forgive me? For believing him? For treating you the way I did? There's nothing to forgive, I said, emotion thickening my voice. You were a child caught in an ugly situation. I'm not a child anymore, she said firmly. And I've been unfair to you. Cruel even. The past is the past, I told her. We can't reclaim those years. But we have now. 3 months, Emma whispered, the reality of my prognosis sinking in. Is there anything they can do? Other treatments, clinical trials. I shook my head. I've explored every option. I've made my peace with it. I hesitated, then added, having you back in my life even briefly, that's more than I dared hope for. Emma's hand found mine on the bench between us. What do we do with the time we have left? Get to know each other, I suggested. I want to learn about the woman you've become. And if you're willing, I'd like to tell you about the woman I was. Not the villain in your father's stories, but the mother who loved you every day for 46 years. I'd like that, Emma said softly. She glanced back at the reception hall, where staff were now clearing tables and dismantling decorations. Some wedding day, huh? Not quite what I'd planned, I admitted. This conversation is worth more than any reception, Emma said firmly. She stood still, holding my hand. Come on. Let's get out of here. Where are we going? Emma gave me a tentative smile, the first genuine one I'd seen directed at me in 30 years. Home. To talk. To start over while we still can. As we walked toward the parking lot, Emma in her wedding dress and me supporting her arm as if we'd never been parted, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Hope. Not hope for my own future. That path was set. But hope for healing, for understanding, for a connection I'd thought forever lost. 3 months wasn't much time to recover 30 years of separation. But as Emma helped me into her car, her new wedding ring catching the moonlight, I realized it was enough. Enough time to share our truths, to rebuild a foundation of understanding, to create memories that might sustain her long after I was gone. Mom, Emma said as she started the car. The words sounded natural now, no longer foreign on her tongue. Yes, sweetheart. I think I've missed you my whole life without even knowing it. As we drove away from the vineyard, leaving behind the wreckage of a wedding and the weight of 3 decades of silence, I felt the circle of our story beginning to close. Not with the perfect fairy tale ending I might have once imagined, but with something more valuable. Truth, forgiveness, and the precious gift of time, however limited, to finally be mother and daughter again.